What is up, you guys? Welcome back to Drew's Automobile Wonders as I continue my series of vehicles I have owned. And on this episode, we are going to look at my 1979 Jeep CJ5 Renegade that I owned. This vehicle was quite the love-hate relationship, and it was it was a very fun vehicle, but at the same time it had its problems too, and we'll get to that here in a minute. But I bought it. I live in the Detroit metro area here in Michigan, and I went up north, up by Saginaw to get this Jeep. It's a small town just west of Saginaw, and I started to drive it home, and the signs that it was going to be one of those vehicles was the fan ate into the radiator because the bearings in the water pump decided to go out. So I had to have it towed back to the house at that point. And then I had issues with the title because the previous owner had title hopped it. So I had to send it back to him, and then I had to get it all sorted out with Secretary of State or DMV, whatever you want to call it. So that took about a month to sort out, but I got it figured out, and meanwhile I fixed the water pump on it. So it had a 304 AMC V8 in it, of course. That's half the reason I bought it, because I wanted a factory V8 CJ. I always thought these were pretty cool, and it was only 150 horsepower and like 220 foot-pounds of torque, but it was still somewhat impressive for what it was. But I think half the reason is because this Jeep weighed about as much as my Miata does, and because of that, you get into a habit. At first you're thinking, oh man, this thing turns on a dime, holy crap, and then as soon as you go over, but then when you go over 25 trying to turn a corner, you're like, whoa, hold on there, okay. Maybe it's not as good at handling as my instincts are trying to tell me. But yeah, I know these things are prone to rolling over and stuff, but it was, yeah, this was definitely a top-heavy vehicle, and it showed. Here's a picture of the interior, and there's a lot to it that I'll get to here in a minute, but those seats were either out of an old Camaro or Cutlass or something. Those were not the original seats, and it was pretty rough inside. It had a flat back to it. The lights were recessed, the tail lights, as you can see, and it had a weird looking mural on the back, which the guy did a pretty good job, but it was odd for being the vehicle that it's on. And it had a rotted out bumper on the back too, as you saw there, and there's a picture of it playing in the leaves, kind of like what I did with the F100. And then it started snowing, and I started playing in the snow and the leaves and stuff, and four-wheel drive and everything worked on it. This was the first four-wheel drive vehicle that I had owned, and I'm like, you know what, well, why not, go have some fun with it. And if I owned it longer, yeah, I definitely would have put more work into it, but I'll get to that in a minute on why I didn't. And as you can see, I was doing the Jeep Flex with it, all the new Jeep guys do it, so I was like, let's see if this old bird can do it. And as I quoted when I posted this on my Facebook at the time, I said, flexes like an old man. And it did too, I think. But it was all cool. I ended up going down to Toledo and getting a picture in front of the Overland smokestack, and that was a pretty fun time. And it went down the road pretty rough, I have to say. There's this one big giant blob of like patch repair that they did on one of the roads around here, and I ended up taking the Jeep down that at one point, and I want to say I did get airborne over that, because everything got really light and the motor revved out just a little bit, so I'm pretty certain I got airborne over it. This thing rode like a rock. I mean, it was pretty rough riding. So then eventually I bought some original CJ wheels off my buddy, and I had ended up getting new tires for it. My ultimate plan was to reverse this thing and make it put it back to original in appearance, because I did not want those big turbine wheels on it. and those tires were pretty worn out too. So I ended up putting, you know, normal tires on it. As you can see here, it still has a body lift on it. Now that body lift, I hate body lifts. This is what really turned me to disliking body lifts, because this right here was a big joke in terms of the work that was done to it. It also, I believe, it had a little bit of suspension lift to it too. The shackles were, you know, bigger than the normal ones, so I want to say it was maybe like a 2-inch on the suspension, and you know, and then another 2 inches on the body lift per se, although it varied, because once again, this body lift consisted of these solid aluminum braces. And as you can see in this picture, I took a picture of the frame here, but if you look over in the corner, you could see somebody cut up aluminum blocks and just mounted the body straight to the blocks and to the frame. And for that, I can see why so much went wrong on this thing that did, because there was a lot of problems. It started with the body. I had to refiberglass the floor in the passenger side of the body because it was literally breaking apart. It was coming apart at the seams. And I'm like, you know what? It's because this thing has a goofy body lift on it, and I'm going to take it off, and that's why I discovered all this nonsense. So I ended up using hockey pucks, believe it or not. They worked like a charm, and it honestly rode a lot nicer after that too, because even the hockey pucks, it was a day and night difference, because even the hockey pucks had enough softness in it. So here it is after I reversed the body lift on it, and I put it back at a stock level to the frame. It still kind of had the suspension lift, but for the most part it looked a lot better. It didn't look like it skipped leg day so much. And it wasn't as top heavy either, mind you. It was also easier to get in and out of. The other half of the reason why I bought this thing was because it had hard doors and a hard top on it, and the hard doors are very rare and hard to come by, especially for the CJ5s. And I ended up ultimately painting the frame in rust barrier and POR and stuff, because I was driving it in the winter. The frame was solid, however it had many patches in it, and I kind of questioned that at first, but then I didn't think much of it, so I kept driving it. But I ended up discovering a crack in the passenger side, right behind the front wheel, right where the leaf mounts, right behind the spring mount. And it turned out it wasn't right there. It was on the other corner. That was an old repair, but there's a repair we ended up making. I know those welds aren't pretty, but we kind of stick welded it back all together, and because it was winter time and we were welding outside, so, and upside down for that matter, so it was kind of a pain in the ass. But anyways, it wasn't, you know, it was meant to hold the frame back together, so ended up painting over that. And as you can see, it was cracked. Oh, I take that back. It was right in front of the leaf spring mount. But for that, I was like, oh no, you know, this thing. And once again, it leads back to those body mounts. Those body mounts, I want to say, contributed to a lot of the frame problems on this Jeep. I don't know how long they were on there for, but they were definitely on there long enough to deteriorate the integrity of the frame and the body and so on. So I ended up getting that straightened out. And then I ended up breaking the gear lever, which I was taking my ex-girlfriend home at the time I was with, and the gear lever broke. Luckily it was on a side street, so I called Pop and had him give her a ride home. And then I ended up getting this thing towed back to the house, I knew something was up with that gear lever because it wasn't even the right angle. These gear levers went at like a 45-degree angle, so, and this thing looked like it was homemade or home bent or something like that. It hit the dash when I would shift. So luckily, when I bought this thing, it included an extra trans with the correct lever, and I ended up ultimately switching it out. The transmission that came with it had a little bit of rust inside of it, but I probably would have ended up using it. And it turned out to not be the lever itself. It was the linkage inside that the lever connected to. It broke right off, So I actually had to I ended up swapping the entire top half of the transmission. So there's the lever right there after I got it all finished up, and as you can see, it's at a much better angle, and that's the proper angle for it too. It was very sloppy. It was, you know, you were stirring a bowl trying to shift this thing. The pedals, I discovered you have to use your heel in a CJ5 to push them down, the brake pedal and clutch, because there's no leg room in these whatsoever. And then we ended up ultimately running into bigger problems, and that was the clutch. As you can see, the pilot bearing was shot. So we ended up putting a new clutch in it, and then it started acting up again, and it wouldn't go into gear. It kept clashing, and we were like, well, what in the world is going on? So we couldn't figure it out. We ended up pulling the thing apart about 2 or 3 times. We ended up putting new oil in it and everything, and, you know, trying to figure out what's going on. And come to find out, we pulled it apart one more time, and we went in and pulled the new clutch out, and guess what we discovered? The new clutch had broke. And we were so angry because we had spent like 2 weeks trying to figure this out, and it come down to just a faulty new part. And as you can see right there, it broke, and it was useless. It's one of those 3-point, you know, pressure plates. So and it ended up breaking right there, and that's what we get for getting the cheapest part off Rock Auto sometimes, as I know some people could probably relate, but it is what it is. But we ended up getting it back together. We ended up using the old pressure plate because there was nothing wrong with it. We looked it over and made sure everything was okay with it, and that's how I got rid of the thing, as a matter of fact. But come springtime, I ended up pulling the top off of it, and then I was up in the air about selling it at that point, and I ended up putting it up for sale. And it was kind of a love-hate thing because I really enjoyed driving this thing with the top off and the doors off of it, in the warm weather. It was so cool. That roll bar actually was just bolted to the body. It had no physical use whatsoever, and it also had these down tubes that it was like it was a full it was a 6-point at one point, and the guy cut it up, so I ended up taking those bars off. I just cut them off, and it looked right, but it still had little stubs where I cut the bars off. But this turned out to ultimately be a fun vehicle to drive. I mean, I love driving this thing and playing with it. It was just, the unfortunate thing is it was such a hack by the previous owners that owned this thing. Supposedly it came from Colorado, and then, you know, it was brought here, and there's a 4th of July photo right there. I remember that. And it looked good from a distance, but it was ultimately pretty, it was a hack job. I mean, this thing, between the body work, or the body mounts, and the, you know, the interior and stuff, and the seats, it was quite the hack. And it turned out to be a big headache for me. And once again, I hated to get rid of it, but I ended up, there's a picture of me. I haven't done a pose like that in forever, a Captain Morgan pose. I usually do that. But anyways, the body itself came apart. The fender had ended up falling off because the stub broke on it, and that holds it together. And we ended up screwing a piece of like household bracket on it to hold it back up in place again. So, you know, ultimately the body needed to be replaced. It was just falling apart. And it's unfortunate because I thought it had potential, but it ended up being a little too much more than I could keep up with at the time. And once again, you know, I ended up buying another car I'm going to be putting on here, my Pontiac Parisienne that I own. That was a car I bought while I was supposedly going to fix this up, But once again, it just turned out to be too much work that I could keep up with. And would I own another CJ? Absolutely. But the next CJ I get, I'm going to build it from the ground up, you know, with the TDK frame and, you know, put all the right work into it that should be done, especially if you're going to drive it every day, you know. So I ended up trading this thing for my Chevy Dually, which I will also be getting to here. But all in all, this was a fun vehicle to drive. It was just a pain in the ass to keep up on because of neglect and abuse by previous owners, which is weird because motor-wise, other than the water pump, it ran great. So anyways, that'll wrap it up here for my 1979 Jeep CJ5. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I shall continue on with my series of vehicles I've owned. Stay tuned, and take care. Later, everybody.